Right now, in dozens of regions across Russia, people are lining up for hours just to buy gasoline. Not during a war shortage in some history documentary. This month. Some stations are capping purchases at 30 liters. Some cities have brought back odd-even rationing, like it's the 1970s all over again. And in Crimea, authorities didn't ration gas to civilians. They stopped selling it to civilians entirely. Here's the part that should bother you more than the cues themselves. None of this is happening because Russia ran out of gasoline. It's happening because someone, somewhere, has to decide who gets the gasoline that's left. And they're doing it without the one tool that's ever solved that problem for any society, at any scale, in human history. Price. You've felt this before, even if you never had a name for it. Every time you've watched a government manage a shortage, fuel, medicine, apartments, even parking spots during a snowstorm, and watched it turn into chaos, arguments, and someone's cousin mysteriously getting served first, some part of you thought, this isn't bad luck. This is what always happens. You were right. And by the end of this video, you're going to have the exact argument for why. A single diagnostic question you can point at any rationing scheme, in any country, under any political label, for the rest of your life. It's not a new argument. An Austrian economist named Ludwig von Mises worked it out in 1920, arguing with people who were certain they could plan an economy better than a market could. He was right then. He's still right now, watching gas lines in Sochi. Let's get into it. In 1919, an Austrian economist named Ludwig von Mises stood up in front of a room full of people who were certain they'd found something better than the market. Central planning, rational, scientific allocation of resources, no more wasteful competition, no more chaos of the price system. Just experts deciding what gets made and who gets it. Mises asked them one question they couldn't answer. How do you know if you're right? Not morally right, not politically right, arithmetically right. If you're a factory manager and you need to decide whether to build with steel or aluminum, in a market economy, you check the price. That price isn't arbitrary. It's the compressed result of millions of people all over the world competing for that same steel, for 1,000 different uses you'll never know about. The price is telling you something true, how scarce this thing actually is, right now, relative to everything else. Take away the market for that steel. Put it entirely in the hands of the state, with no real buying and selling of it between independent owners, and that number stops being real. It's not a price anymore, it's a guess. You can call it a price. You can put it on a spreadsheet. It still doesn't know anything. Mises's conclusion was blunt, and it's held up for over a century. Without market prices for the means of production, rational economic calculation is not just harder, it becomes impossible. He put it almost that starkly himself, writing that rational economic activity was impossible in a socialist commonwealth. Notice what he's not saying. He's not saying central planners are stupid, or lazy, or acting in bad faith. Some of them are brilliant. Some of them work 18-hour days trying to make the numbers work. It doesn't matter. You cannot outthink a missing signal. You cannot will a price into existing through sheer competence. That's the diagnostic question, right there, in its simplest form. What is guiding this decision, if not a real price? Keep that question in your pocket. We're about to hand it a second half. Mises's argument is devastating on its own, but 25 years later, another economist added the piece that makes it click completely. Friedrich Hayek, in a 1945 essay called The Use of Knowledge in Society. Hayek's angle wasn't, the numbers stop meaning anything. It was something even harder to fix. The information a planner would need doesn't exist anywhere a planner could reach it. It's not sitting in a database somewhere, waiting to be collected. It never existed as one big picture in the first place. It only exists as millions of tiny, local, constantly shifting fragments. This trucker knows this road is out. This shopkeeper knows this customer just lost her job. This farmer knows this field flooded. Scattered across a whole society, in people's heads, half of it contradicting the rest. No commission, no ministry, no AI model fed every satellite photo in existence gets to collect all of that in time to act on it. By the time you've gathered the report, the truth on the ground has already changed. Here's what a price does that nothing else can. It doesn't just move goods around. It compresses all of that scattered local knowledge into a single number, without anyone having to explain themselves to anyone else. The trucker doesn't file a report. The price of diesel just moves, and everyone downstream adjusts, automatically, without needing to know why. Take away that price, replace it with a mandate, a ration card, a purchase limit, a bureaucrat's best estimate, and you haven't just lost a pricing tool, you've lost the only mechanism society has ever built for turning a million people's scattered knowledge into one coordinated outcome. Mises showed you the arithmetic breaks. Hayek shows you why no amount of intelligence fixes it. Now let's watch it happen, live, this year. Now, let's set the stage for what you're watching live, not in a history book, but right now, in August 2026. Since May 2026, Ukraine has dramatically escalated a campaign of long-range drone strikes on Russian oil refineries and fuel infrastructure. We're talking about strikes on facilities deep inside Russian territory, the Omsk refinery, 2,500 kilometers from the front, which alone processes about 7% of Russia's entire refining capacity. Dozens of strikes, waves of attacks. 10 of Russia's largest refineries have been hit. The attacks are coordinated, repeated, and fast enough that repair crews can't fix one facility before the next one is burning. This isn't a strategic shift in Russian economic policy. It's not some Kremlin central planning initiative. It's a direct military consequence. Physical destruction of supply in real time. Moscow's government did what any state facing a sudden, severe shortage would do. It started telling people what they could buy and how much. Ration cards, purchase limits, 30 liters per person, max. Odd-even days, where you can only buy fuel on certain dates based on your license plate. Emergency mandates. All of these are the government replacing the price signal with a mandate. Here's where I need to be precise, because this matters for credibility. Russia is not a socialist economy in the classical Misesian sense. It's not a centrally planned system like the Soviet Union was. Russia is a state capitalist system. Significant state ownership and control over major industries, yes, but not abolition of private property or the elimination of markets entirely. Gazprom, Rosneft, Tatneft, these are massive energy companies with managers, profit motives, production targets, and some degree of market activity. That's categorically different from a pure, centrally planned economy where the state owns everything, and markets don't exist at all. But here's what matters even more than the label. The economic mechanism Mises and Hayek identified doesn't care about your political ideology. It doesn't care if you call yourself socialist, capitalist, or sovereign democracy. It only cares about one thing. Did you replace the price signal with a government mandate? The moment a Russian regional governor says, no more than 30 liters per person, that governor has just walked directly into Mises's problem. The moment an energy minister imposes purchase caps instead of letting prices move freely, they've activated the exact mechanism of dysfunction Hayek warned about. The price stops communicating. The knowledge stops flowing. Rationing, queues, and allocation chaos become not a failure of ideology, but a mathematical inevitability. This is the key insight. You don't have to be running a full socialist economy to run into the calculation problem. You just have to replace prices with mandates. You can do it in a state capitalist country. You can do it in a mixed economy. You can do it in a democracy. The mechanism doesn't care about the label on the building. This is what we're about to document. A state capitalist system activating the Misesian calculation problem through price replacement, in real time, in 2026. Let's talk hard numbers, because this is where the abstract principle meets reality. As of late June 2026, 2/3 of Russia's 83 federal regions were under some form of fuel rationing. 66% of the entire country dealing with ration cards, purchase limits, or outright shortages. By early July, that number had spread to almost all regions. 50 million Russians, about 35% of the entire population, were directly affected by the shortage. But the speed of the collapse is the part that really illustrates the calculation problem. Let me walk you through what happened in just 4 months. In March 2026, Russian refineries were producing about 120,000 metric tons of gasoline per day. By April, that fell to 110,000 tons. May, 100,000 tons. Then June hits, the drone strikes intensify, and production plummeted to around 90,000 metric tons per day. That's roughly a 25% drop compared to June 2025's daily average. But here's the thing. The economy doesn't stop needing fuel just because refineries are damaged. During peak summer season, harvest time, vacation season, agricultural activity ramping up, domestic demand for gasoline sits at around 110,000 to 120,000 metric tons per day. Russia was now producing 90,000. The shortfall wasn't theoretical. It was a daily gap of 20 to 30% between what people needed and what was available. No price increase fixes that overnight. You can't price your way out of a 25% production collapse in a week. And in Russia, they tried to control the price anyway, price caps on top of a shortage. That combination doesn't create fair allocation, it creates queues. The most extreme illustration? Crimea. On June 21, 2026, the Russian-appointed governor announced that civilian gasoline sales were completely suspended. Not rationed. Not limited to 20 liters a week on vouchers. Suspended. Completely. No fuel sold to anyone except state agencies and government services. Ordinary people couldn't buy fuel at any price, because there wasn't enough supply to ration. There was only enough for the state itself. This is the Misesian calculation problem in its most naked form. When price no longer signals scarcity, the planner has no tool left but outright prohibition. You can't allocate what you can't measure. When you've killed the price signal, prohibition is all that's left. And it took 4 months to get there, from a functioning market to total civilian fuel lockdown in one territory. So that's the mechanism. Those are the numbers. 2/3 of regions rationing, production down 25%, Crimea in total lockdown. But what do those cold statistics mean for the actual people living this? Here's the human translation, and it's worth sitting with this number. A Gallup poll conducted between March and May 2026, before the worst of the summer fuel crisis even hit, found something remarkable. 60% of ordinary Russians surveyed said the economic situation in their region was getting worse. Not might get worse. Getting worse. Right now, in their lives. 60%. That's not an opposition complaint or a fringe concern. That's 6 out of every 10 people you pass on the street in Moscow or Vladivostok saying conditions are deteriorating. For context, during the COVID-19 pandemic, which literally shut down most of the world economy, Gallup's highest pessimism reading in Russia was 50% in 2021. With global lockdowns, mass business closures, and genuine economic collapse, only half of Russians said things were getting worse. In 2026, it jumped to 60%. This is the worst number in 20 years of continuous tracking. 20 years. Since 2006, Gallup has been asking Russians this question. Not once in that span, not in 2008 when global markets crashed, not in 2020 when the pandemic hit, not in any year since, has pessimism reached 60%. 56% of Russians also reported their standard of living was deteriorating, another 20-year record. 56% watching their own material reality decline faster than at any point in 2 decades. And it gets worse. The job market, which had been a rare bright spot through the early war years, collapsed. 58% of Russians now say it's a bad time to find employment where they live. A year earlier, that figure was 46%. In 1 year, job market confidence dropped by 12 percentage points. A sharp reversal of what had been the most optimistic labor market sentiment Gallup had measured in 2 decades. The everyday patriotism deal, the unspoken arrangement where Russians tolerated the war as long as the government delivered stability and jobs, was visibly breaking down. Remember, this entire survey was conducted before June, before Crimea suspended civilian fuel sales, before the queues started stretching for hours. When the fuel rationing exploded in July and August, these 60% weren't starting from optimism. They were already at their lowest point in 2 decades, watching their paychecks stretch thinner, watching jobs disappear, watching the government's promises fail to materialize. This is what losing the price signal feels like from ground level, It's not theoretical. It's a Russian worker standing in a 3-hour line at a gas station, wondering when they'll fill up, wondering what comes next. Mises predicted chaos. What you're watching is what that chaos actually does to human lives. Here's what matters about Russia's fuel crisis in 2026. It didn't have to be Russian. It didn't have to be 2026. This exact mechanism, these exact symptoms, the cues, the rationing, the paralysis, the regulatory explosion, appear wherever someone decides to replace the price signal with a government mandate, regardless of the country, the decade, or the political label painted on the building. Take Venezuela. In 2003, Hugo Chávez's government imposed price controls on gasoline as official policy, not a wartime emergency, just a decision that fuel should be cheaper than what the market would set. The government argued that cheap fuel was a birthright for Venezuelans. For years, this seemed to work. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves. Surely abundance would prevent the catastrophe that Mises predicted. But abundance didn't matter. Price control did. By the mid-2010s, Venezuela was facing chronic fuel shortages despite those massive reserves. Not because oil disappeared, because price controls had destroyed every signal that allocates it. Without a real price, there was no incentive to invest in refinery maintenance. No signal to prevent theft. No reason to keep technical staff. Production collapsed. By 2019, soldiers in military gear were rationing gasoline to 10.6 gallons per vehicle in some cities. People waited 12 hours for fuel that never came. Drivers blockaded streets with metal barriers in protest. Venezuela had the oil, the infrastructure, the people, everything except the one thing Hayek said couldn't be replaced by decree, the price signal compressing dispersed knowledge into action. But Venezuela had the label of socialism, so defenders could blame ideology. Fine. Let's look at the United States instead. August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon, a conservative Republican, not a socialist, not running a command economy, imposed wage and price controls as part of a 90-day freeze to manage inflation. This was capitalist America. Democratic institutions. Free markets. Except by 1972, gasoline shortages appeared anyway. When the Arab embargo hit in October 1973, those price controls were already locked in place, and they turned what should have been a manageable market adjustment into catastrophic shortage. Lines wrapped around gas stations. Panic buying. Drivers waiting hours to fill a tank. The government didn't know how to allocate fuel across states, so it created emergency regulations. 30 pages of rules became 5,000 pages in 2 years. Each layer of regulation tried to patch the hole created by the previous layer. Economists, even at the time, Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, Murray Rothbard, pointed out what Mises had predicted 50 years earlier. You don't create shortage of oil by having too little oil. You create shortage by freezing the price that allocates it. Without the price moving to signal scarcity and opportunity, the coordination system collapses. It wasn't until 1981, under Reagan, that the price controls were finally lifted, and the shortage ended. Not because more oil appeared, but because the price signal came back online. Same mechanism. 3 different cases. Venezuela under socialism. America under capitalism. Russia in state capitalism. Different ideologies, different systems, different decades. 1971, 2019, 2026. The label changes. The mechanism stays the same. The results are always identical. Russia 2026 looks different on paper from Venezuela's socialism or America's 1970s controls. But the moment price stops moving freely, the calculation breaks down. You can't allocate 90,000 metric tons of fuel per day to 110 million Russians using a government mandate. You can't know who needs it most. You can't know whether to move it to Moscow or Vladivostok or keep it where it's produced. You can only issue ration cards and watch queues form. This is why Mises's argument isn't about ideology. It's about mechanism. It's why people end up sleeping in their cars outside locked gas stations, not because Russia failed at socialism, it didn't try, but because someone decided the price should be set by bureaucratic fiat instead of supply meeting demand. The machine doesn't care what you call yourself. It doesn't care if you're Marx or Milton Friedman. It only cares about one thing, whether the signal is real or fake. The consequences are always the same, always. So here's what we've covered. In 1920, Ludwig von Mises asked central planners a simple question: if you abolish the market for the means of production, how will you know what to produce? Without prices, without exchange, how do you calculate? For a century, that question went unanswered, because the answer is brutal. You can't. Hayek built on it a quarter century later. Even if you could somehow gather all the data, the knowledge that matters isn't sitting in files or databases. It's scattered across millions of minds, embedded in local context, changing faster than any bureaucracy can process. The only mechanism that's ever aggregated that dispersed knowledge in real time is the price system, because it doesn't require knowledge. It requires only that people respond to signals and make their own decisions. Neither of them was predicting what would happen in Russia in 2026. Mises died in 1973, Hayek in 1992. They never saw drones, they never saw Ukraine, but they saw something deeper: the structural impossibility of replacing price signals with mandates. And they were right. In June 2026, a Russian governor looked at a shortage and did what governments always do: replace the price with a ration card. 2/3 of Russia's regions followed. Crimea went further and locked out civilians entirely. 60% of Russians, already at a 20-year low for economic sentiment, watch their government do the one thing that guarantees the crisis will get worse, not better. The mechanism is not punishment. The mechanism is pure mathematics. You cannot allocate scarce resources without a price signal. You cannot coordinate billions of decisions without a signal that compresses information. You can try. You will fail. Mises proved it. History confirms it every time it's attempted. This is why the diagnostic question matters. Next time you see a government impose price controls, announce rationing, or claim they'll manage a shortage better than the market can, you have a tool. Ask, what is guiding this allocation decision if not price? If the answer is government mandate, you know what comes next. You've seen it in Venezuela. You've seen it in 1970s America. You're seeing it in Russia right now in real time. The pattern doesn't care about your ideology. It doesn't care about your good intentions. It only cares about mechanism, and mechanism always wins. If this framework resonates with you, if you want to keep building mental tools to see past the headlines and understand what's actually happening economically and institutionally, hit subscribe. We're going deeper into how systems actually produce outcomes in future episodes. Like this, if the economic calculation argument changed how you think about government intervention, share this with anyone who asks, why don't they just control prices if it would help people? Because they deserve to know what Mises figured out before you were born. And if you want to see how this same mechanism played out in one of the most visible policy failures of the last century, watch the previous episode on NYC's welfare system. Same argument, different context, same results. Drop a comment. What shortage or rationing have you seen in your own city or country? What did you notice about what happened when the price stopped moving? I want to know what you've observed. This is Liberty Lens. Thanks for thinking with me.